and welcome to the 15-Minute Book Club. This is the short podcast designed for that little break in your day where you don't want to start a big long thing, where an author gets 15 minutes to sell you the idea of their new book. With a minute to go, we will hammer them with something ridiculous that some idiot on the internet will say, and then we'll make fun of the idiot on the internet, which is always good fun. And then our lovely Patreon people get another 15 minutes where we talk about how the book was written. You can sign up for that by going to our 15-Minute Book Club Patreon. Without further ado, hello, Boney.
Hello.
How are you today? Should we find out who we've got?
We do. I'm just looking at myself. I'm warm. My little room is roasting. So that's hence the sort of the patina of pinkness around me. But we have got a fabulous author with us today, and I have read this book, so I'm on team buy it straight away, dear listener. But hello, dear author. Who the heck are you, and why are you here?
Hello there. Well, I'm Adrian Goldsworthy, and just as of a few days ago, I've had my latest book, Athens and Sparta. Got to read it, The Rivalry That Shaped Ancient Greece, because I never remember the subtitle.
Yeah.
It's often different in the American edition, and it's never anything I've written anyway. It's always something they've added.
What people don't realise is that your subtitle, no author cares less what their subtitle is.
Exactly, because any you suggest they won't use. So.
Exactly, yeah.
So anyway,
I'll cover that bit up.
There we go. Well, it's fine. It's a decent subtitle. It could be worse. But I'm an ancient historian in the main. I moved from doing academic stuff to writing for the audience of, I think it's anyone who's interested enough to pick up a book on Julius Caesar or the Punic Wars or Athens and Sparta in this case and wants to know more. So I work on the basis that you don't need to know anything before you start and it'll all be explained, but also that if you do know something, hopefully I can make you look at it in a slightly different way, come back to things that are fresh. So this is going to the heart of classical Greek history, 5th century BC, though I go a bit earlier and a bit later, so it's a long 5th century. And it's trying to tell people, there's all those, we were told repeatedly, weren't we, last year, there are all these chaps out there that think of the Roman Empire all the time. And I'm like that, but then I would be, that's what I've been doing for the last few decades, all my adult life. But we don't think about the Greeks, and they don't get the documentary coverage. They don't get the drama stuff. How many films are there compared to, you've had Gladiator.
There's one coming out in a couple of weeks, isn't there?
Yes.
My eye is twitching at the remembrance of Angelina Jolie and Alexander.
You're stealing a bit of your 15 minutes. We got to start a timer, Adrian. We're not just letting you do this. I like your style, though. This is playing the game very well. Okay, so let's do this properly, and you'll get round about 15 minutes because normally we get chatting and I forget to look at the time. So here we go. So Adrian, your 15 minutes begins now. There we go. So you've sort of already mentioned the whys, but I think let's change this question around. Why does Athens and Sparta still live so vibrantly to a lot of people today? It's a lot less known, as you said, but why is this something that we still care about?
Well, this period did have a huge influence on all subsequent Western culture. A lot of it via the filter of the Romans, but nevertheless, it's there. If you think of it, the image of the Acropolis, the Parthenon on top, is instantly recognizable. And it immediately screams out classical Greece, civilization, philosophy, art, culture, all of these things. We don't tend to notice the fact that it is a very propagandist Athenian saying to the rest of the Greek world, we are better than you. And we are, we're not afraid of telling you that. The Spartans people know about because one of the few bits of ancient Greek history that survives in the popular memory is Thermopylae. The last stand of Leonidas and the 300. You get it, it's referred to in films. You had the 300 based on the comic book movie a few years back. People know that. That's probably about all they do know about the Spartans, other than that they're tough guys and they're good at fighting. So people know a bit and they have this sense of the Greeks being important. But as I said earlier, they don't get the attention and they don't get even the documentary channels rarely do it. You'll get a few things on Sparta. But when you think not just the idea of democracy really takes shape in Athens, but it's pushed to a degree that it's never really seen again elsewhere. And it makes Athens successful, but it also leads to Athens' fall. And it's the Athenians who sit down, or people in Athens who've gone there, and start talking about it in terms of how do we understand what is politics, what is a state, how do different systems work. A lot of that's starting to happen after they've lost a big war against Sparta and are less important. But these are big deals. So many of our concepts, our ideas, not just words like democracy, think anarchy. It's from the Athenians had these magistrates called the archons, and in a year that you couldn't hold elections because of political rioting was anarchos, a year without archons. So it doesn't quite mean what we think it means, but it's that sense of how it's there so much, again, through the filter of Latin. But the Greeks have this deep influence on us, but we don't know as much about them, and we don't think as much about them as perhaps we should.
I think so. Let's have a look at them. So I think the thing that strikes me is that they're Athens and Sparta. The ethos of the two is so fundamentally different. So why don't you talk people through that? And also, like, to that end, are you Team Athens or Team Sparta?
Talk people through that in 10 minutes and not in the 500 pages.
I know where my bread's buttered. I'm still Team Roman because that's the bulk of what I do. But the one thing to remember, we're talking about the Greeks before there's a Greece. Mm-hmm. There is no country of Greece. There's no urge towards unity. I mean, the staggering thing, when you look at how fairly small Greece is and how much of it's mountain anyway, and even if you add in all those little islands in the Aegean, some bigger, but lots of, and then the Greek colonists that scattered around the Mediterranean up to the Black Sea, southern Ukraine, there are probably something like 1,000 Greek cities that are all independent, are all their own state, and they live within sight of neighbors that they don't like and are rivals and often enemies. So Athens and Sparta are two of the big ones, the sort of top 5, and they probably are the most important, the biggest there. So, but they are, as you say, experiments in something completely different. The Spartans remember themselves as the descendants of conquerors and keep the overwhelming bulk of the population are serfs, the helots as they're called, that do all the work. So Spartans don't have to earn a living, they're given food and can practice being a good citizen, which also means being a very good fighter. And that's why they're better than everyone else when it comes to warfare. The Athenians, on the other hand, after periods of tyranny and revolution, turn themselves into this democracy where every male citizen gets a vote, and each of those votes counts for exactly the same value. They can all speak in the assembly if they can turn up and get the attention of the people who are presiding over it. And that the will of the people decides everything, and it decides it instantly. If you think if Parliament passes a law now, it's then filtered through not just the Lords, but then various institutions, courts will look at it. It can take ages before something happens, and maybe it doesn't. The Athenians can change their mind, and overnight, that's state policy. This is what we're doing. So it's incredibly direct, which does lead to some bizarre, dangerous decisions, but it also means they achieve far more than everyone else. So this is democracy in the raw, even though, as we'd understand it, women don't get a vote. If you're foreign and you live there, you don't get a vote. They own slaves. So this isn't a 21st century ideal. This is a 5th century experiment in something, but it is a remarkably interesting experiment.
And I think what's fascinating as well is so many people will know so many of your characters throughout this, because they've come down through so many different tales and retellings and fantasies around them. This Sophie's Choice question of this period in Greece history, who was the character that stood out to the sort of the Demosthenes, those sorts of stand-up folks? Who was the one that when you got to in your narrative you were most happy to delve into?
The man who's crying out for a Netflix series is Alcibiades, the Athenian, who's this aristocrat who struts around, is often drunk, but has this charisma, can persuade people. In the democracy, he can persuade them, even though he sets himself aside as an aristocrat, he can get people to do things. But he gets involved in this scandal with, a mockery of a religious ceremony being conducted at a party at his house, eventually goes into exile because he won't go home and face trial, goes to Sparta, gets chummy with the Spartans, gets very chummy with one of the 2 kings of Sparta, but then has an affair with this guy's wife, to the extent where there are rumors that somebody's debarred from kingship later on because they're assumed to be Alcibiades' son. He leaves Sparta because obviously that's getting hot from him, persuades the Persians to start helping the Spartans in the war, then changes sides again, goes back to Athens and tries to get the Persians to persuade them, gets eventually chased out again by the Athenians because he's promised more than he can deliver, advises them before the last battle. They don't listen to it, so they lose. He then goes off. He gets killed when what appears to be the brothers, basically, of a girl that he's seduced, turn up and burn his house down at night. So, it's... I've written novels. This is a great story. The material there is pretty good, and this is all how it's going. So people like that, but I mean, Themistocles, the schemer, the admiral, there are so many that are larger than life. And one thing I wanted with the book was to emphasize that these are real people, and they're getting their hands dirty. Most people will have heard of Socrates, and they'll think of the ideas. Maybe they'll know about the Athenians forcing him to commit suicide, drinking the hemlock cup. But they won't necessarily know that this is a man who went off and served in war and fought in several battles, saved Alcibiades' life on one occasion. Aeschylus, the famous playwright, he composed his own epitaph, which emphasized that he fought at the Battle of Marathon and was concerned entirely with his bravery there, where his brother was mortally wounded. So, he was really involved in this. Didn't care at all about all the artistic things that we elevate so much. So there's a danger because the culture produced particularly by Athens is so exceptional, and it remains, the comedy is still funny to this day. It is inspiring, and the art is moving. But that's just part of it. There was a real life going on where people had to make things, do things, and they often argued with each other and fought. So I wanted that sense of the reality, the practicality of it all to be there.
I don't want to hold you responsible for ancient culture and any misogyny undercurrent to it, but do women get a look in on your cast of characters?
A little bit, but it's always difficult to get the information. You have Pericles and his mistress, but again, you never know how much is said about her that is to defame him. But she was clearly... That's the thing. It's in a strange way in Greek society. It's rather like it with Alexander and people like that later on. It's not the wives so much that get attention, because the ideal, particularly for an Athenian, is that you should never be talked about. And you should be so honorable that nobody said. So it's the mistresses, the ones outside, and they're intriguing. You get a little bit about the Spartans because, there are only 2 Spartan poets, one of whom, in what survives, composed songs to be sung by choruses of teenage girls, basically in these public celebrations. We think about the men training and the boys, but there was a lot of community stuff with girls as well at Sparta, and they were considered to be much fitter, healthier, better looking, sort of more outgoing. They could own property, and they become so it's a weird thing that Spartan society is repressive in some ways is actually better in many ways for its treatment of women. But as always with the ancient world, you miss the evidence you don't get. The other people telling their side of the story. It'd be wonderful to have a detailed Persian account of the Persian invasions that's if they could be bothered to do it, particularly with the early stuff. Is this really that important to them? You'd want to have an account written by an ordinary rower or somebody poor in Athens, a citizen, but you get the playwrights creating these comedy characters, but how much is that a caricature of what someone's... So you're always, with all history, but particularly the ancient world, you are glimpsing it from a very narrow perspective. The thing to try and say is remind people all the time, other people are there, other people are thinking things. Just because, so often people will say, this was the Greek attitude to religion, partying, sexual politics, this sort of thing. And what you really mean is this is the opinion of some aristocrats at Athens that have written something down about it. And how representative is that of Athens, let alone all those other nearly 1,000 Greek communities that are doing their own thing? So you've got to remind yourself of that, but in the end, the evidence isn't there. So you can ask the question, but you can't give an answer.
We've got a couple of minutes before our Mr. Gammon question. So I wanted to ask you about the oracles. We were chatting about this before you joined us. These powerful ladies were basically the original influencers, aren't they? Because they're kind of pulling stuff out of their ass, but building it in such a way as they're kind of always right.
You get the impression that particularly the famous Pythian oracle, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, which is the navel of the world as far as the Greeks are concerned, and does attract, famously you have the king of Caria who goes and asks, if I fight the Persians, will it go well? And if you fight the Persians, a great empire will fall. Whoopee, he thinks, I'll attack them, but it proves to be his own empire that falls. So, it's poor old King Croesus got that one wrong. But they're right in a sense. They do seem to have a remarkable intelligence gathering service. You get the impression they're hedging their bets. Partly because so many pilgrims come to them that I think they can keep their ears open to what's going on. But it looks as if in the big invasion in 480 BC under Xerxes, big invasion that leads to Thermopylae and later on naval battle of Salamis, basically at the start, the Pythian oracle is telling the Greeks, you've had it. It tells the Athenians to abandon their city. The Spartans, they're even the Athenians go back and ask for a second opinion. Could you have that again? Because they think it. But it changes as time goes on. So they're almost reading the situation. With all of these things, you've got to be right enough more often than you're wrong. And it's rather like, we go, how many of us? I'm a great cricket fan, so often I've gone to watch a match to sit there under my umbrella with the rain, having been promised good weather by the Met Office or the BBC, whoever it was. But this is Britain. I live in South Wales, so particularly there might be that localized thunderstorm just where I am. But we still go and check the weather forecast, even though we know it's not infallible. So it's sort of that level of everyone's nervous when they're about to do something. So you're seeking reassurance in a sense of, okay, and of course, if you're told good things, this is likely to go well, you're probably that much more confident in doing it, which means there is actually more chance that you'll win the battle or your trading venture will go well. So given the uncertainties of life then, this is a very dangerous time, but they have considerable power, but you can work your way around them and you can manipulate them. So and the other problem is the oracle given to the Spartans before the Persian invasion is that one of their kings will die, and nobody quite knows. Well, we know King Leonidas does die at Thermopylae. Is the oracle as preserved actually written down afterwards? People know that, or were they really? And was he thinking? Some people would say, well, he's going to almost sacrifice himself for the state. I'm willing to die because it's for the good of my people. Or are they? Well, is he thinking? Well, there's two kings. It might not be me. It could be the other guy. So it's so hard to know. But it's important. But again, there are probably as many different ways of thinking about these things as there are today in terms of beliefs and senses of luck and things like that.
Right, minutes ago. You say in this book that you're working with a poverty of sources, Mr. Goldsworthy. I put it to you that you've just made all this up.
Well, what I have done is try to be very honest about what we know and what we don't know and where we're guessing, because you can present ancient history as a nice, neat story where everything fits, but it isn't like that. We are dealing with sources, particularly if you look at the Spartans, most of the sources are centuries later written by outsiders. Don't necessarily understand what was going on at all, or just this is some funny old culture. So what I've tried to do is be honest. I see it as it's history with the scaffolding still up. I try to present people with essentially the same approach that anyone, if they are a scholar who's been working on this all their life, or they've just picked the book up. Here is the evidence. Here's how we try and understand it. These are the conclusions I reach. This is where I think, I'm pretty sure this happened. This is well attested. This is where we don't
Time's
know.
Up.
And this is where I just asked the question.
No. You make it goes quick, doesn't it, those 15 minutes? But finish what you're saying, because that was fascinating.
Well, I try, as I say, to show where, but it's also comes back to what we were saying earlier. It's very important to ask the same questions you would ask if you were writing a history of the 20th century, whether of an individual, whether of a battle, whether of a campaign. Because the same practical factors of how things occur, how communications work, how ideas, how armies move, how they feed themselves, how they operate, how commands are passed on, all of those things are still there. They were problems the Greeks faced. We can't necessarily answer how they did it, but at least you're reminding yourselves that this isn't just something, it isn't easy to marshal a fleet of 350 odd warships and then maneuver them against the Persians, or an army of 40, 50,000 men at the Battle of Plataea, when they're all come from different nationalities, different cities, and they haven't worked together before. So we can't answer how they did it, how they fed themselves, but we can ask the question and conjecture a little bit, but make it clear that's what we're doing.
We're going to keep going with Adrian, with our Patreon people for Patreon extra time. And we are going to ask, I have a question about the naval stuff, because that bit is fantastic. But Adrian, do you want to just give the book a quick plug again for those of our listeners who are about to leave us? We're all holding it up. I don't think Alex got one, so we're just sort of showing off now.
Sorry. Athens and Sparta, the rivalry that shaped ancient Greece. I see it as a prequel to my Philip and Alexander, which some people may have come across. It tells you how the Greek world got to be how it was when Philip II, father of Alexander the Great, was born. So It's meant to be an introduction. Wow, they're breeding.
I know. I got the proof, and then I got the full one. Which is fairness. Yes. So, and I think they're gonna they will pair very pleasantly indeed. So there we go. So links to Adrian's book will be available via our bookshop.org affiliates here and in the States. Check the links out in the description below. We'll put Adrian's website in there as well. Because in Patreon Extra Time, we might ask about a couple of his other characters that he's made up, who I want to get him on record as saying he might return, he might not. But there we go. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Until next time, we have been the 15-Minute Book Club. That has been Adrian Goldsworthy. And see you next time. Bye-bye.